Hey, it's me. You're listening to the Paul Leslie Hour. Welcome to the first episode in the new year. We're welcoming one of my favorite artists. Pat Metheny is a musician. He's been called one of the greatest jazz guitarists of our time, a composer and prolific recording artist. He's also one of the most active touring performing artists of all time. He's kept up the pace of 120 to 240 shows a year, and he's been doing that since 1974. A 20-time Grammy Award winner, Pat Metheny has also collaborated with a variety of artists, from Ornette Coleman, Jim Hall, David Bowie, Bruce Hornsby, Herbie Hancock, just to name a few. Pat Metheny, it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Well, it's my pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for including me into your show.
It's an honor. Well, I wanted to start with the now. Something that I like about being a Pat Metheny fan is that it seems like there's always something new. You're launching this new playing environment, and it's called Side-Eye. I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about that and why you're doing this.
You know, it's funny. Over the years, I've kind of, first of all, been really lucky to be able to explore all the different aspects of music that have interested me. And, you know, kind of early on, I discovered there was a certain value in delineating different things in certain kinds of ways. I mean, you know, a big part of my life has been playing trio music, you know, with just bass and drums, and I've done a bunch of records like that. And then, you know, I've had, you know, groups of different types, you know, that have ranged from, you know, 4 people to up to 7 or 8 people, kind of under the name of my own group. And I've done, you know, individual projects with, as you mentioned, a number of other musicians. And, you know, the whole kind of thing of having a life as a musician that sort of branched off into lots of different areas, you know, it kind of worked for me to sort of almost brand them in a certain way. And, you know, I notice now a lot of people do that. It seems to be, it wasn't that common to do that in the, you know, 70s and 80s, but now I see that quite a lot, where people have, you know, this band and that band and this band and that band. The one thing about it for me is that as much as I kind of did that for, I would say, just sort of clarity, the truth is kind of, it's all the same to me. I mean, you know, if it's my band or, you know, I'm the leader of it, I kind of operate pretty much exactly the same way, regardless of who's on the bandstand. And I mean, in that sense, sort of everything I've done over the years, whether it comes right out and says Pat Metheny Group or whatever, I mean, it's all kind of done the same way. And at the same time, you know, my main job in a lot of ways has been band leader. I mean, you know, and kind of under the heading of band leader has followed very naturally and organically writing music that fits a particular setting and even a particular group of musicians, hopefully, you know, trading on what I see their strengths as being. And kind of now at this point, it's more likely that I'm going to be investigating people who are a lot younger than me. You know, I mean, that's just kind of the way it works as time goes on. I mean, so for many, many years, I was the young guy that was, you know, playing with older people. But, you know, it's been pretty common for me over the last few years to have guys that were newer kinds of musicians that had captured my interest. And you know, the whole thing of having a band name and, okay, this band is this group of people and this band is this group of people, in a way, it's great to do that, but it also is a little bit limiting. And this whole idea of having a band, which we're calling the side-eye thing, is a chance to sort of keep it really open so that I can have a platform to write for and sort of, I guess, kind of present younger musicians that have captured some little bit of my imagination. So I see it as something that's going to have a kind of revolving cast of characters.
So what is it like when some of these younger musicians look to you as their mentor, when they're in a bit of awe?
That goes away very quickly. And having, again, been on both sides of that equation, I got to join Gary Burton's band when I was 18 years old, which for me was the equivalent of joining the Beatles. To me, that was my favorite band, and everything about what that band represented at that time was the ideal for me. And at the same time, within 4 bars of the first tune of the first concert, it's like, okay, that's great, but now it's time to play, and now it's time to make hopefully some music happen. And I've played with people who, I very recently have played, on birthday celebrations for Roy Haynes, who's now about to turn 94, I think. And I've played with people who were like 9 or 10, and there is, of course, a thing when that's happening. But once you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, then you're in the world of music. And in that world, all that really matters is, what does it sound like? What's happening? How does it feel? Are we all going to agree on whether this is going to be a minor 7 flat 5 or a regular minor 7 on that turnaround? It's like all of those issues become much more of the thing rather than, oh my God, that's, Herbie Hancock. It's like at that point, once you're in there, you're in there. And it goes the other way now for me too. It's like once I'm, on the bandstand with anybody, it's really just about the music.
As we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you're someone who performs a lot of concerts. What is the most important thing for a performer to do?
I want to update slightly the numbers that you recited. Yes, it's true. There were many years in there where I was out on the road, more than 200 days a year. It's been quite a while since I've done anything at that number. I have 3 kids now that range from 19 down to 9, and those guys have been on the planet. I definitely have not done those kind of 9-month-long straight tours. But I still am hanging out there, 100, at least 100 gigs a year, I would say. So that's still quite a bit, but it's not like those, those years from 77 till about 2000 or so. It was really like that. The thing for me about playing is that that's really and when I say playing, I mean playing concerts, playing gigs. That to me is the destination. There was this kind of what will probably be regarded as somewhat odd period from, the, late 1920s up to about 2005, where there was this thing called the record industry, and records were king, and recording, it was all about recordings. Even, for the time that I overlapped with that sort of golden era, to me, the records were always kind of an ad to get people to come to the gig. I definitely took it more seriously as time went on. But to me, the thing of going out and playing for people, playing gigs, that is why I wanted to be a musician. So, the bandstand that's church for me. That's where everything leads. And there's also a kind of liquidity to that. It's something that is very ephemeral. It comes and goes. It's like that gig was that gig. And due to the nature of what improvisation is and this general area of music, what it represents, I encourage people to go go to gigs and hear their favorite musicians, because that's it. That's the destination, and it happens that one time, and that's it. And that's something really special. It's very unusual. And, I basically became a musician myself because I'm a fan of music. And in particular, I'm a fan of musicians like Joe Henderson and Milt Jackson and, Jimmy Smith and, Wes Montgomery and Paul Bley and Bill Evans and on and on and on. But, those guys are no longer on the planet, and we can have tributes and we can listen to recordings, but that was it. It happened that one time. That was it. And, all of the musicians that are represented in this community, that's it. When you hear them live, that's what the thing is. And records do a little bit of something, or at least they did, because it's becoming now much more difficult in a way to manage to document a career as an improviser the way maybe it was, because the whole system that allowed you to be able to do that has pretty much gone away. So, in a way, it was good that I never really bought too much into the recording thing. I always, thought that, well, that's great, and I love being able to do that. But to me, gigs have always been the destination.
What band or artist would we maybe be surprised to learn you're a fan of?
Well, probably in my case, there wouldn't be too many surprises, because it's pretty well known that I am, an enthusiastic follower of, pretty much everything, really. I mean, I can hear a bunch of garbage cans getting knocked down a flight of stairs, and that sounds pretty good to me. So, what I like is when I hear people play, where I get the feeling if they didn't play that way, they would go crazy. They must play that way, and it doesn't really matter to me what it is. It's like, and if it can have that quality combined with creativity, because really, I mean, as much as people talk about styles of music and genre and all that stuff, which almost always is not really about music. When you get down to it, it's really more about politics, actually, and culture and stuff like that. What I like is creativity, in whichever form it occurs. And I mean, in terms of models of creativity, I mean, we have some, incredible, examples of what creativity can be. And the Beatles, for instance, I mean, in 9 years, what happened over that arc in terms of creativity is just unreal. Or Bach, I mean, it's like those are the levels of achievement that for me are unbelievably inspiring. And then, the people that kind of in the general area that I travel in, that have defined the language. I mean, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, and Louis Armstrong. On my instrument, Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall, kind of in the general area of modern music, Keith Jarrett, or, Chick Corea is a great example. I mean, there are so many people who have really, taken the idea of what it is to be creative and also connected that to unbelievable amounts of skill and mastery and understanding and wisdom about what music is. Those are the people that ultimately attract me. But at the same time, I can go to one of my kids' school concerts and get completely blown away by just the joy that music brings to a bunch of people, that are as participants, as parents, as friends, or whatever. I mean, music can function on many, many different levels.
Something that's been a really great resource that I want to call the attention to the listeners. It's the book. It's called The Pat Metheny Interviews by Richard Niles. Great read. And in one of the interviews, you're talking about the things that your parents were into. Like, I think you mentioned the Glenn Miller Orchestra and their favorite song being Stardust.
Yep.
What we now call the Great American Songbook. I'm curious, what are your feelings about those kind of songs?
Well, for me, the idea of composition is one that kind of emerged originally for me as a opportunity to explore the things that I liked and that I hoped to get to as an improviser that I was not able to find in other places. And kind of to my surprise, that whole issue of, we can call it composition, songwriting, whatever that is, has more and more found a place at the heart of a lot of my activities, including the band leading thing that I talked about before, and through that, in many ways, I'm kind of coming to it backwards, which is my appreciation in a lot of ways of just sort of the resiliency and the kind of the way those tunes, by that, the classic standard tunes that we all know and that we all love, the way that they retain whatever makes them what they are, no matter who plays it, under what circumstances. As long as somebody plays kind of the right notes of Stardust and somebody else plays kind of the right bass line and, maybe there's one or two right notes of harmony in there, it's going to just sound great. And it's indestructible. You can't mess it up as long as you kind of just do what's there on the page. And, to me, and kind of, again, in our zone more specifically, Monk is kind of a guy that, to me, those 20 Monk tunes that are kind of the ones that get called a lot, they're indestructible. You can't mess them up. They're, as long as somebody plays kind of what he wrote, he's going to be in the room, everybody's going to sound great. That quality of being able to get played night after night after night 100 times a year or over many, many years is something that I aspire to. And I use those tunes, Stardust being a particularly great example, as real models of whatever that thing is, which is actually quite difficult to describe. A lot of it has to do with melody, which is the one thing that you really can't describe. We can talk about harmony and rhythm all day long, but and you could go to college for 4 years of harmony and 4 years of rhythm, but melody is just it's such a mysterious thing that you can't really break down what makes a good melody. You can sort of make a couple, like, yes, it's nice if they do these kind of interval leaps or whatever, but actually that doesn't begin to cover what makes a good melody a good melody.
I think this was the last time you were in Atlanta. I had the chance to record an interview backstage with Antonio Sanchez, who was drumming with you. And he said something to me that struck me. He said, jazz musicians in general tend to be a little snobby. They tend to be a little snobby with the audience. And I'm hoping I can get your thoughts on that.
Well, I know what he's talking about. Weirdly, I would say that's much worse in his generation. I don't know what happened in there somewhere where people got the idea that somehow there was a level of entitlement built into just being a good musician. And, for me, I was lucky to be around, I guess, older school type musicians in Kansas City when I grew up and was able to play with them. And then, people like, Gary Burton or Herbie or Jack DeJohnette or, these guys, to me, it's like they always took it very seriously in the best way, in that they, as I described, a little earlier, the whole idea of the bandstand is kind of it's like almost sacred ground. You get there through a process that sort of mandates a kind of reverence to not just the music, but the privilege of being on the bandstand. Now, having said all that, to me, a lot of what I've tried to do over the years in terms of presenting the music in a way that hopefully is just conscientious to the fact that somebody had to take a shower and go pick up their date and park the car and get the ticket and do all the stuff that one has to do to, get it together to be there that night. To me, I always try to think, okay, well, if that was me, because it could have been. I mean, I'm a fan too. I go to concerts. It's like, what would I expect to have happen? And to me, it's like the band shouldn't be doing a sound check in front of the stage. There should be a sense of what it is that's being communicated, hopefully in a way that is, I don't want to use the word entertaining. It's more considerate. And sort of along the lines of that, to me, is just some of the basic tenets of, let's call it showbiz, of sort of like, making things clear and making things intelligible as they can possibly be to an audience that has gone to a certain amount of effort to just be there. And I put that more in the realm of consideration. And when I'm kind of talking about the younger dudes, lots of times, I hear about a song, like some new guy, and I go hear them, and they're like, they're not together. It's like, man, they didn't rehearse, and it doesn't seem like they really know what they want to play. And, I kind of walk away like puzzled, like, wow, man, come on, you guys. And to me, that I think comes off a little bit as being, condescending to the audience, which in a way it kind of is.
Are there any rituals or an environment that you try to get or have that you find that works best when it comes to creativity?
It's funny. I wish I was able to nail that down, whatever that would be, but I found that it's, for the most part, elusive. The one thing that I do know, though, is you got to show up. It sort of doesn't matter where or under what circumstances. At least for me, in terms of coming up with ideas, the sort of hard work of it all, I need a lot of time for that. I need to set aside time, and I need to just be in a place. Could be anywhere. I mean, it could be, I've come up with a lot of my, what I would say, better ideas under horrible conditions, and I've been in amazingly perfect, beautiful places and never come up with anything. In fact, I would say it probably leans more towards the worse the place is, the more likely it is I'm going to come up with something. But even having said that, I think that it's really just a matter of putting in the hours, at least for me. The other thing for me is that at this stage of the game, I am, so far, into my thing. I mean, I'm 500 tunes or so in, that I kind of have to write through everything that I've ever written to get to new ones. Because the stuff, and this is good. There's really no part of anything along the way where I look at it and I go, oh, that was horrible. That was a terrible idea. What was I thinking? I still kind of stand by really everything from Bright Side's Life on. It's all kind of one big idea in a way for me. But there's also, I understand, there's really no need for me to rewrite that tune X on X record X again. And I'm naturally inclined to kind of go there because I still do like the way that chord moves to that chord. And even sometimes I'll find a new meaning of what that chord moving to that chord means. But, my rate of success with and in this case, we're talking about songwriting or tunes or composition. I'm pretty much like 1 for 8. I got to write 8 things to get one that I like. And when I say I like, one that I feel like I could play 100 nights in a row and find something to say about it every time. So, yeah, it's like that. But then the other side of creativity for me is actually the more kind of thing of just going out on the road and playing gigs, which is a much easier kind of creativity for me personally, because I've done it for now 50 years. So my whole metabolism is kind of geared to that. And, the thing of playing gigs every night is something that's just an unbelievable thrill, a real privilege, and kind of gets you in a place personally that's very unusual, in the sense that you're in a different city every day, you're traveling on a bus every night, you're living this life of almost total immediacy. It's all about, what time is the sound check, what time is the gig, and what do I have to do to be able to get to my thing tonight, to be able to play as good as I can. And, especially after week of that, you get into this, really living in the present thing. And like I often say, all those issues of, like what happens when you die and stuff like that, you're not thinking about that stuff. You're just thinking about, why did I mess up that major 7 sharp 5 chord on the 3rd tune last night, and what do I have to do to not do that tonight, and stuff like that, So that kind of creativity actually is it's almost like I don't want to exactly make a parallel with being an athlete, but I think that, like, for instance, Michael Jordan, is kind of like in his world, the John Coltrane, the most creative kind of athlete, and in a lot of ways it's something like that, in that you're going to be faced with this set of possibilities each night, and the boundaries of the basketball court for us would be, what tunes are we going to play, and who's the drummer, and what's the vibe of the band, and sort of anything can happen within those boundaries.
I've left some of your performances with kind of like a glow. Is there anything you feel from your audiences? Is there an emotion that you pick up?
I did a talk recently to a bunch of neuroscientists, and a topic a little like this came up, and I gave an answer that I think confused people a little bit, and I want to kind of be careful about that. My connection to the music that I'm involved in playing myself is, it's difficult for me to step outside of it. And because I'm so in it, I don't have the luxury of being able to, in any objective way, see it or hear it or anything except being it. And to the degree that I'm aware of the audience, which is, again, as I described before, more kind of a matter of consideration on almost a personal level than it is on a musical level. From the time I start playing until the time the concert is over, I've come to understand the best place for me to be is inside the music. And sort of how people react to the music, of course, I'm thrilled that people, are hopefully enjoying it, that they like it, and that they come even. The fact that people, are aware of what my thing is and how it's evolved over these years is just incredible. But at the same time, I don't feel like I have the kind of maybe it's an ability or talent or skill to go outside and look at it as it's happening or even right afterwards. My responsibility to the music is absolutely from within. And this is the harder part. My only satisfaction, I mean, I wish I could get a lot out of the reaction of other people, and I do my best to appreciate it, but I know in my heart the only satisfaction I really get is if when I go home and I kind of replay the concert in my mind, which I kind of do each night, that I feel like I actually got to the stuff that I'm hoping to get to a little bit better than I did before, or even at all. And in that sense, I mean, I would be pretty happy to just kind of stay in a room for the rest of my life and practice. To me, music is something that's very personal. And it kind of almost gets to the point for me, especially recently, I almost don't feel like I even have to play. I can just kind of think about it. And music has become this sort of whole other thing for me, where it's something that it's more like an indicator of things than a thing. And it's the things that are underneath music that are really where the action is for me. The music is such an amazing, mysterious, and sort of, it's almost it's kind of unspeakable in a way what music is, But I think for musicians that really live a life inside music, as time goes on, you start to understand that music is sort of a connector to things that may or may not even be about what music itself sounds like. It's more like what music is.
You were mentioning just a little while ago the Bright Size Life album, and I've been listening to that lately. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, how did that feel to make your first album?
Well, I was very lucky at that time to be around Gary Burton for many reasons. I mean, being in that band, as I described before, was something in and of itself unbelievable to me. But besides that, Gary, Steve Swallow, Bob Moses, Mick Goodrick, the other musicians that were in Gary's band then, were all incredible mentors for me in different ways. And Gary in particular, because Gary had gone through something that I think he recognized could have happened with me, which is, Gary started making records of his own when he was 18, 19 years old, and I think had a lot of regrets almost about the first few records that he made. And he put the brakes on it a little bit for me. I mean, I had the chance to do what would have been my first record for ECM about 2 years before I actually did Bright Size Life. And, when you're, 17 or 18 years old, 2 years is like, 50 years. And Gary really kind of just said, don't make the same mistakes I made, in the sense that when you make your first record, you should assume that's the only record you will ever make, because it might be. And that really stuck with me. And, I started bringing the music in that I was working on to Gary, and he was in a great way very, very critical and unbelievably useful for me as somebody, because not only could he just understand it on sort of a, let's say, a career level or whatever, he could also kind of get under the hood of, knowing the way that I played, and, as I was kind of coming up with concepts that I would run by him, having a lot of good things to say about, or good suggestions. And he finally, after this had gone on for a while and I was getting more and more restless to actually do it, he finally heard the band that I had at the time with this unknown bass player, which of course ends up being Jaco Pastorius, but nobody knew that at the time, and Bob Moses. And, the record company sort of had an interest in me doing a record that was more like a, with some established type people. which of course was incredibly exciting to me as a young fan and everything. But Gary was like, you should really do it with your band, with these guys. And so that's what it ended up being. And Gary was there in the studio. He's not credited as a producer, but he should have been.
I received all of these press clippings, different magazine articles. This man named Terry Kane sent me Jazz's magazines when he found out I was going to be interviewing you. And there was something that I thought was really interesting. It was where the interviewer, he would mention a few jazz guitarists, and you said whatever your thoughts were. And there was just a couple that I felt I wanted to know the answer to, just if you could briefly give your thoughts. Larry Carlton.
Well, to me, Larry was an unbelievable musician, and particularly the contribution that he made around the time of Joni Mitchell's, records like especially Chord and Spark and that era was, really a new way of thinking about playing, not to mention on the Steely Dan records. And, again, just the way that he's able to play inside of a rhythm section and inside of a band, just, a brand new way of doing it at that time.
What about Bill Frisell?
Well, it's funny because Bill was, a guy that I met in Boston who called me up like a lot of people did back then and wanted to come and take a lesson. And I was like, okay. And so he came over and, he was very Jim Hall then. He was playing on a 175 and, really sounded a lot like Jim. And at the same time, he was already Bill too. And, it's kind of interesting, both he and John Schofield, even though they're both like 3 or 4 years older than me, they came along kind of after me by a few years. It's funny that I would be talking about Bill now as somebody who was calling me to come over and take a lesson, right? But, he was just kind of like getting going then. And in fact, the first thing I said was, well, you don't need any lesson. And then, right around then, my older brother Mike was about to do one of his early records. And I was like, hey, would you play on my brother's record? And I think that might have been Bill's first record date. And, then shortly after that, this would have been late 70s, early 80, around the time I did the 80-81 record. And Jack DeJohnette couldn't do part of that tour, so I got Paul Motion to do it. And Paul was kind of like saying he had this idea where he wanted me and a saxophone player to be a trio with him. And, I was already, well underway with the band and everything, a lot of things were happening around that time, and I couldn't do it. I said, but, I know this guy. He would be great for you. So that was Bill. And so, he and I talk about that a lot. And of course, he, went on and continues to be this unbelievably unique, amazing, incredible force in music. And I'm just kind of in awe of him in a lot of ways. He's really just like a beautiful musician.
Just one more. Lee Ritenour.
Yeah, Lee is kind of about my age, I think. And in a lot of ways, my awareness of him was more just from studio records and him being a kind of West Coast guy that I wasn't all that familiar with. And then later on, it became clear that the West thing was huge for him the way it was for me. And in fact, he ended up doing a record, I think, that was really a tribute to Wes. I was probably able to connect more as a listener to that because that's stuff that I love so much. And I think he's even got a guitar that's kind of like, almost like a West-type guitar that Gibson made for him, but it's a little bit smaller, that I've had my eye on for a long time, too. It's like, I want to get a Lee Ritenour model Gibson, so And I see him every now and then. There's this camp up in Montana that's a guitar camp that I went to teach at once, and he was there. And that's been a while back, but he's a super nice guy.
Are there any musical dreams, any dream projects that you have in mind that you have yet to fulfill?
God, there's millions of them. I mean, I've always had way more ideas than I've ever had time to execute them. As we're sort of moving into new territory here, one thing that I do feel that our community has been not great at in the past 30 years is sort of developing new context for music. I love playing in small group rhythm section type bands, and all the kinds of things that are more or less straight down the middle of what is expected of our community. But the tradition of this music has always been to kind of push the boundaries of what can be. And in my department, the whole orchestrion thing was, if nothing else, it was an attempt to like, okay, what else could music be? What would be another way of being on a bandstand and presenting oneself as an improviser and or as a player or whatever? And for me, I'm like always thinking of stuff like that. Like, well, I love playing. I like I said, I'd be happy to kind of stay in my room and practice Autumn Leaves from here on out. But it's sort of like included in the mandate of being a musician and with the kinds of opportunities that I am lucky to be able to get. I feel a certain responsibility to kind of keep trying to ask questions of what could be, and even on the instrument, like what else can a guitar be? And a big part of my focus has been that question. Like, okay, I love playing on a ES-175, like I did the first X number of years, but guitar is really great when you're sitting around the campfire and everybody's singing Michael Row the Boat Ashore. That's one of the things guitar does best, So why do we avoid that sound completely in this realm? So a record like New Chautauqua maybe went to that, and then, the many different types of guitars that I've been trying to integrate into the one sound that is whatever my sound is. I don't think of it as being limited to a particular guitar. It's sort of guitar in a general sense, and that's kind of included nylon string stuff like with Charlie or, and on and on. All those different things, the guitar synth, they're all an attempt to sort of say, okay, what are some other contextual possibilities I can offer to other musicians about what the guitar can be? So if I think about the broader thing of like looking ahead, I'm really interested in just like, okay, maybe records aren't a thing anymore. Gigs are still going to be gigs, but what else can there be? What else can we invent as improvising musicians as a platform to be? And I look around my peers. John Zorn is a huge hero for me as somebody who just relentlessly is inventing ways to be John Zorn. And he's a real model for me.
On the note of being, what is the best thing about being Pat Metheny?
Well, 20 years ago, I might have given a bunch of answers in a lot of different ways, but after the, in the last 20 years, the best thing is being around my kids. There's nothing even close to that. And my whole family, my wife and all of that. That's like, I started a little bit late with all that stuff, and I had a lot of fun before that and did all kinds of cool stuff and had all kinds of cool things happen. None of that even begins to compare to the incredible experience of watching a bunch of kids grow up and being around them and learning from them.
At the end of all of my interviews, I always like to give the artist the stage. We don't know when someone will listen to this. This is going to be the first interview of the year, but we also don't know where. I know you're going to be going to Tokyo for a stretch, but what would you say to anybody who's listening in? Not just limited to music.
Well, that's a pretty big platform there. I mean, I do, of course, like many Americans, have incredible concerns about the state of our country, and I see actually what's happening right now not so much as a thing in itself, but as the result of like years and years and years of a certain kind of cultural decline that concerns me. I mean, I really do believe that the idea of what America can be is a great idea, but it's really gotten, sort of perverted, I would say, through the kind of perversion of capitalism that's happening right now. At the same time, the larger issues of what it is to be a human on Earth are good to keep in perspective. And my perspective on that is that, at least once every 2 months or so, I go down the street to the Hayden Planetarium and watch whatever space show Neil deGrasse Tyson has going on, where they do that thing where they show the Earth and then they start zooming out and then you just see the whole picture. So it's good to always to keep that in mind. And in that sense, I'm very lucky to be trading mostly in the currency of music, which is actually much closer to what all that is than any of the day-to-day, foibles of our still very primitive species, So, I just try to, as much as I can, be in the thing and trying to do as much as I can to keep things positive.
I would encourage everyone out there to check out patmetheny.com if you see that there's a show in your area, or if you have to travel a little. I suggest you go. I think you'll enjoy it greatly. Thank you very much for spending time with us.
My pleasure. It was great talking to you, Paul.
All right. Happy trails.
Same to you, and happy holidays to you, man.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for including me in your thing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Be good.
You too.
Bye.
Ba doodly beep bop dee da dee bumpity boo rapati kanaza jip pop kila kanat sa gil bond good tinga manga but yeah hunga I guess I get back in the I got the inga rock tinga langa bo I can't no oh goodbye.